Amen. As you're being seated, grab your sermon handouts. We're in the third and final week of an interesting series on angels and demons. Week 1, Lucifer. Week 2, demons. Week 3, angels. Now, on your handout, I've given you a list of 30 Bible facts about angels. Most of them are very basic stuff. If you are Bible literate and have studied the Bible, it's all very simple stuff to you, so I'm not going to go over that list. I just wanted you to have, if you're not familiar with the Bible, just a sheet that gives sort of understanding of the background of angels. And I shared with you last week that the main thing I'm going to do today is share a story. I have a 2-minute sermon of 2 more points I'm going to give at the end of the sermon, but I'm going to share a story of the one time in my life that I met an angel, and it is my personal story, and I will confess that it is not an easy story for me to share. So it's been a little bit of a hard weekend for me just because I have to share some pretty painful stuff. So I would appreciate if you would pray with me before I share. Father, I thank you that there is no pit so deep that you are not deeper still. And there is no soul that is beyond your reach. Lord, I thank you also that the heart of every heavenly angel is for us to not look at angels, but to look at Jesus. So we do today look at Jesus, the author and perfecter of our faith, and say, let Jesus be glorified this day. In Jesus' mighty name, all God's people said, amen. I shared a little bit last week that I was raised in a very violent home. From the time I was 4 years old on, never went a week without being beaten. My dad's choices of beating was belts and boards, and almost never knew why I was being beaten. I was just told that he was sick of me and he would beat me. And that was my life from 4 till about 14 or so, when I just got too big to be beaten. And so home was just a very unsafe place. If he was in a rage, he would just grab you and beat you, sometimes strip you naked and beat you. And then when I was in 2nd grade, we moved to Philadelphia, and that was horrible. Philadelphia in the 60s, you can't imagine how bad it was. And so 2nd, 3rd, and 4th grade, and I was a frail, geeky, Coke bottle glasses kid. And the school I went to, I made straight A's, which was not a good thing. But if you brought home a B, you got a beating like you can't imagine from my dad. So you brought home straight A's. But that made it much worse for you at school. And so it was verbal abuse on a daily basis until about 5th grade, when it started becoming more physical abuse. And then in 7th grade, our elementary school funneled into this high school. And what genius decided to put 7th graders with 12th graders? I'd love to meet that person. But they had 7th, 8th, 9th, 10th, 11th, and 12th grade all in one school. And Unionville High School in Philadelphia was just if you've never been in a world like that, there were fights every day. Every day, fights was just a common thing. And you get slapped around, shoved around, but I only got really beat up maybe once a week. I'll tell you what was shocking to me was, because when you live in that world, you don't think about it. You don't feel sorry for yourself. You're just dirt. That's your calling in life. You don't think about callings. All you think about is surviving for the next 2 minutes and the next hour, and that's your life every day. But you just can't imagine what it was like for me to move down here in 10th grade, summer 4 10th grade year. We moved down here to Georgia. And I went from Unionville High School to Wheeler High School. Now, when I went to Wheeler High School, I'd never met a born-again Christian. I never heard of a born-again Christian. Now, we went to church like once every year or two up in Pennsylvania, like Easter sometimes, And so I believe there was a God. I mean, if he'll leave me alone, I'll leave him alone. That's about all I knew about God. And I come down here to Georgia to this school that's filled with all of these cheerful, born-again Christians. And at Unionville High School, I don't care how big you were, the first day you were in school, you were in 2-3 fights. And they were not nice fights. You were kidney punched from behind. You had your head shoved in a locker because you had to find your level in the pecking order the first day. And I was, of course, the bottom of the pecking order, but everybody got in fights, especially when you first got there, until it was determined how tough you were and where you fit in the rank. And so you just saw fights every day, and the whole school would break up in riots a couple times a year. Well, I came to Wheeler High School, and you learn to be quiet. I would go months without saying a word to anyone, because to speak is to invite a beating. So, I was a very, very, very quiet person. And so I didn't hardly say a word to anyone my first, 6 months at Wheeler. And I couldn't believe the first day that no one kidney punched me or punched me in the privates or shoved my head in a locker. And but I learned to be a very observant person, but no one was fighting anyone. And the whole first week, no one was fighting anyone. Well, that went on the whole year. And I still was very quiet, but I'm just watching. It's like I kept feeling like I was on a Hollywood movie set. And any day they were going to pull away the facade, and the world was going to return, and the gangs and the mobs and the beatings were going to return. And all these, I'd never seen so much teeth in my life until I moved to Georgia. They grin all the time. Hi. And they look you in the eye. How are you today? I never had people look at me and ask me how I'm doing. It was just, you cannot imagine how disorienting it was to move down here. And so I just was like this shell of a person. But in the midst of this, going up through all this, in the 8th grade in Pennsylvania, I joined the wrestling team because they said wrestling was tough, but I found wrestling to be wonderful. Number one, wrestling's one-on-one, and I loved one-on-one. Number two, the guys I wrestled were my weight. I'd never had anything close to that. And so that was wonderful to actually get to compete. Even if you lost in wrestling, the worst happens is you get your face slammed in the mat. You don't get kicked in the face. You don't get kicked in the privates. It was easy peasy. And so I found out I actually had some ability in wrestling. So 8th and 9th grade, and I've been wrestling now for 44 years as far as being involved in wrestling. I'm a coach at Marietta High School right now. I'm a volunteer coach. I love wrestling. It's really part of who I am in my soul. So I found out I had this ability, and I got better and better. So when I came down to Wheeler, I joined the wrestling team right away. And if you know much about wrestling, if you have some ability, about the 3rd year, you have a huge increase of skill set. So I was really good by my 10th grade year. And I joined a wrestling team that was really good. So I'm 119 my sophomore year. And I won region at the end of the year, which is shocking for a 10th grader to win the region championship. So 10th grade year, mostly quiet, but I actually had a couple friends, and nobody tried to beat me up the whole year. It was just a very disorienting year. And then, so by the 11th grade year, the 11th grade year started, and I began to just really relax. I began to believe that these teethy, grinning people were sincere, and this was a safe place. And so I began to come out of my shell. I began to be, I came way out of my shell. I began to be popular. I began to have friends, and my wrestling really jumped to a whole new level in 11th grade. So 11th grade, I was one of the best wrestlers in the state. I won every tournament I was in. I won the North Metro tournament, the Cobb County tournament. I won region again for a second time. And going into state, I actually had a big article in the paper. My wife still has it. Fittner, one of the favorites to win state title. And I got like to the 3rd round and lost to the eventual state champ. And after I lost in the state in that junior year, something clicked in me. And what clicked in me was all this accumulated, and the beatings from my dad, that was just rage. But all my dad did was beat you. But what happened to me in the neighborhoods was degradation. They didn't just beat you, they degraded you. So I had many times where once they beat you, one time they made me lay on the ground while 15, 20 people took turns walking on me and wiping their boots on me. This is the middle of winter where your boots are dirty. And one time where they made me stay on the ground while 15, 20 people spit on me until they were done all their spit. If you beat someone, you're ordered to lie still, you lie still. And one time when it's like 25 degrees outside, and they took my coat and took my shirt and took my t-shirt and made me stay outside for an hour or two and, just in shirtless. And the whole idea was just to degrade a human being. Well, that's what I'd been so degraded that, and my life had so changed, and I'm processing all this, but something clicked in me. after I did pretty good in state in that junior year, and I looked ahead, and I've got 1 year left, and it was like I could be somebody. I could be a person of worth. If I could win state, then I wouldn't be dirt. And somehow all that I've been through all those years all came together in this fierceness. I'm going to win state next year, and then I will be somebody. And the level, you've seen, if you know wrestling, wrestlers tend to be fierce, but the level of fierceness I hit was exponentially higher because this was about, I was going to finally get my head above water. I was going to be a person that deserved to live, as it were. Most wrestlers, the day after wrestling season is over, they pig out and eat ice cream. I went running 5 miles the day afterwards. And I ran 5 miles a day and worked out every day till the next wrestling season started. The most important muscle for a wrestler is his wrist by far. I had these V grips that a really good wrestler can do like 500, 200 times. I could do it 500 times. I could hold a dime there for 5-10 minutes. My mom used to say that my wrist started here and went straight up to like that. I was corded muscle. I practiced. I couldn't wait for the wrestling season. I was going to be an undefeated state champ, and then I would be somebody. So going into my senior year, I had intensity to do this like you've rarely seen in a human being. And then I came into some obstacles. The biggest obstacle was I wrestled 126 my junior year, went up to 132. Well, the year before at 132, Wheeler was what's now considered 7A. We were the highest classification. And Westminster High School was what's now considered 6A. Well, at 6A, there was this wrestler named Nolan Eastham. If anybody's been around Marietta for a long time, his father, Dana Eastham, was a mayor of Marietta at one time. He also was a alternate to the Olympics in wrestling in the 50s. Well, Nolan Eastham was a multiple state champ at 6A level, but that summer that I was working out, Nolan had done something that no other Georgia wrestler had ever done. He'd gone out to the nationals and he had won the national championship because Georgia was not real high amongst other wrestlers. And he was not just a multiple state champ, he was a national champion. No Georgia wrestler. We had plenty of state champions, never had a national champion. And he didn't grow between his junior and senior year. So guess what? He stayed at 132. So I was like, great, there goes my undefeated season because I'm gonna have to wrestle him 2-3 times. And Nolan Eastham, the national champion, is now 132. But thankfully, he's a different classification, so I could still win state, but my undefeated title's probably gone down the drain. So about 10 matches in, Wheeler wrestled Westminster, and I wrestled Nolan, and I was terrified down to my toes, and I lost to him, but I only lost 4-3. And I don't even know that I wrestled my best. And I came off the mat and I thought, I think I can beat this guy. So a month later, we wrestled in the finals of a tournament and I beat him by 2 points. I beat Nolan Eastham, who no one had beaten in like 2 years, a national champ. And then a month later, we wrestled again in another finals of tournament. I beat him by 4 points and could have beat him by more. I was turning him towards the end of the match. So I have now beaten a national champ who no one's beaten him in years twice. In fact, Nolan and I are still good friends. I went to his father's funeral about 4 years ago, and it was kind of funny because we keep up, and I was in the receiving line. I was like 10 people back, and he saw me, and he'd always wanted me to meet his kids, and his 3 adult kids are there beside him, and he said, John, come here. And he said to his kids, this is the guy I've been telling you about, the only wrestler who ever beat me. You know, he drags me to the front of the receiving line. So now we're halfway through my senior year, and I have beaten Nolan Eastham. Now I beat everyone else in the state easily. There was nobody even close to me. And so we get to the end of the year, and my region championship was the same weekend as his state champion. We're supporting each other now. We both want each other to win state. Well, he cleaned up at 6A and just, he won state, like winning pins all the way through. And I cleaned up at region and won it all the way through. So now a week later, it's going to be my state championship, and I'm going to win state, and I'm going to be somebody. And that's where the sequence of events started that led to me meeting an angel. First is my third region championship. I won it. And I also, that summer, had 2 summers before I started swimming. So I had powerful lungs. I still have powerful lungs to this day. Never had an ounce of problems with my lungs. But somehow that night I caught bronchitis. And I caught such bad bronchitis that by the following Tuesday, I was coughing, literally, this is gross, but phlegm, a huge hawkers of phlegm by the following Tuesday. I could not take a deep breath. And no sport is like swimming or wrestling where you have to be able to breathe. But it was such bad bronchitis. It took my lungs 15 years to recover. I scarred my lungs that badly. And I'd never had bronchitis. I had no idea how I got bronchitis, but I hardly ever had a cold, but I caught bronchitis. So the following Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, and Friday, I can't take a deep breath without, and then big old green hawkers coming out. So it doesn't matter. I'm still going to win state. On top of that, Friday morning, the state tournament's tonight, I caught the flu. And I had no idea. I still don't know who had the flu. But by noon, I was nauseous and had a fever. And I did not let anybody know I had a fever. I just checked it myself, found a thermometer, but I had like a 101 fever, and it was 102 at one point, but I won't tell anyone because they might not let me wrestle. So I go in that night, and I still won all my matches. I think I had 3 matches Friday night with a fever, nauseous, and can't breathe. But I was feeling worse and worse as the night went on. So I win like my 3rd match. And we go back to the hotel. My parents were in one room, I was in the other. And I was so nauseous, I'd only vomited once that day. But by the time I got to my room, I literally said, good night, Mom and Dad. They were in the next room. I ran to the bathroom, hugged the toilet, and just vomited till I was dry heaving. And I never made it to the bed that night. I literally spent the night hugging the toilet and 5 or 10 times, tried to get up, and the room was so spinning, and I would one step get so nauseous, I just wound up hugging the toilet and laying my head on the side of the bathtub and spent the night, got maybe an hour of sleep, 5-minute snatches here or there. Finally, 5 a.m. came. It was really funny because I'm wrestling 132, and all year long I'd be 131.5, that kind of stuff, and I weighed in at 127. And so I went to weigh in, and I'm weighing in, but the nausea had settled down enough. All I've got to do is I've got a Saturday morning match, semifinals, beat him, and I'm in the finals that night. And hopefully, if my stomach settles down, I get an hour or 2 of nap, I'm good. And the kid I'm wrestling Saturday morning is from Campbell, even though it's the 4th round. I'd beaten him 11-1 earlier in the year. This was not somebody I couldn't beat, even with bronchitis and nausea and the flu. Now, on top of that, the next thing happens. There's 3 refs at a state championship match, but the other 2 are almost never used, just the primary ref. And I didn't realize it till later, but one of the secondary refs was the guy, and this is not legal anymore, but he's the guy who is also currently the North Cobb High School wrestling coach. And he hated me. He had a little bit of a good reason to hate me. What happens was, and it's very unethical that a current high school coach would also be a ref, especially against someone who he's coached against. In those days, 1975, if you've never been around then, Interstate 75 stopped at the North Loop. Anybody been around that long? It stopped at the North Loop, and North Cobb High School was farm country like you can't imagine. There is no farm country left. You think it's farm, and they were hicks they were the most redneck hicks you've ever seen. But even they were embarrassed by their coach. Their coach was the biggest jerk that any of us have ever seen, and had a terrible reputation as just being an arrogant, mean jerk. But even so, 44 years of wrestling, he did something that if the GHSA had known about it, his coaching credentials would have been removed. So earlier in the year, I'm going to backtrack, when Wheeler had wrestled North Cobb, the match is about to start. At that point, I'm like 15-1, 18-1. I'm ranked number 1 to state because I beat Nolan Eastham. And he had a guy at my weight class that was 12-0, but he hadn't wrestled anybody. So the match is about to start, and always one team's on one side, their team's on the other side. The ref's about to call out the first match, and before it begins, he stands up, walks across the mat, walks straight over to me, stands literally 2 feet in front of me, with all of my team sitting there, my coach down at the end, in a loud voice. The whole gym could hear him, said, "Fittner, my guy's gonna beat your blankety blank blank all over the blankety blank mat tonight." Turn around and walk back. Everyone on my team, including the ref And my coach was just like, we've never seen anything like that. That inappropriate. He really should have been stripped of his coaching credentials. And I was just stunned. I couldn't imagine that someone would do that. So as he goes back and sits down, and my coach had never seen that in all his years of coaching. But his mistake was I wasn't until like the fifth match. So he had 98 and then 105 and then 112, 119, 126, all the wrestled before me. By the time it came to me, I was so mad. You could fry an egg on my head. So what I did, remember I wasn't a Christian, is I shamed his wrestler, his undefeated wrestler. I went out there, and today you can only beat wrestlers by a certain amount of points before they call the match and call it a technical fall. But in my day, you could beat him by as many points as you wanted. So I took him down, and I would put him in a pinning position. And if you put someone, their shoulders are more than 45 degrees. If you hold that for a 2 count, it's 2 points. If you hold it for a 5 count, it's 3 points. I would put him in a pinning combination, watch the ref, hold him there. He'd do the 5 count, and I'd let him up. Obviously let him up. I wasn't trying to pin him. Put him in another pinning combination, hold him, watch the ref, let him up. I was shaming the boy. I beat him 18-1. And his 1 point was the penalty point on me for roughness. So after the match, and this gets worse, you're supposed to shake hands, go right back to your side. So we shook hands. I didn't go back to my side. I walked over, stood the exact same distance in front of the coach and just exact same volume. He said, so much for your guy beating my blankety blankety blank all over the blankety blankety blank. Turn around and walk back. And then when I sat down, my guys cheered. So this coach hated me. This coach was one of the refs at my match. But still, he's not the main ref. And I'm now wrestling this kid that I can beat with one hand tied behind my back. He's not that good a wrestler. I beat him 11-1, even though it's the semifinals. Just got to beat him, get a nap. I can win tonight. I've beaten that guy, beaten everybody. And so at the bottom line of the match, at the end of the match, 30 seconds left, I'm ahead 4-2. I'm just doing enough just to win. And I'm on my base. I'm on bottom, which nobody's going to turn me on bottom. And your base is simply your knees and your arms, and you're based up strong like this. And he couldn't do anything, so he panicked and did something that was quite entertaining. He grabs my ankles, locks them together, lifts high, and tries to turn me by twisting my ankles while standing up in the air. It was actually kind of comical. But if you know anything about the human body in wrestling, you can't turn someone's shoulders by twisting their ankles. Your hips and shoulders and waist are all way too flexible and way too strong, especially for a wrestler. So he didn't even get me 45 degrees. In fact, what I specifically remember is I remember looking at him over my right shoulder thinking, fool, what are you doing? And so finally he gives up and come back down. Time ran out. Match is over. The ref calls us together, shake hands. He begins to lift my hand. He has it that far in the air. And we hear this, stop, 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 refs to the table, stop, refs to the table. So before he can get my hand all the way up and declare me the winner, he looks over and there's that, and I didn't even realize that was the guy was there till then. I still don't think I recognized him. He calls the other refs over. So this ref says, wrestlers, go to your coaches. So I go over to my coach in the corner. And all what I remember very clearly is I couldn't stand, and so all I did was lay down. And for me, the whole thing came down to this. When I laid down, when I opened my eyes, the room spun. And when I shut my eyes, the room spun. So I kept thinking, eyes open, eyes closed. And that's all I was thinking, was eyes open, eyes closed, because the room was spinning. I was trying to decide which the room spun more. But in the meantime of being very woozy and trying to decide eyes open, eyes closed, I was hearing things. First of all, I'd never heard refs yell, ever. And they're yelling at each other. And then I heard my coach yell, and my coach is yelling. And in the midst of all this, eyes open, eyes closed, I could have sworn I heard my dad cussing and screaming and threatening to fight and sue people. But I'd heard that like a million times in my life. My dad always out in public was always threatening to fight people and sue people. And then it stopped, so I knew it was my imagination. It turns out it wasn't. My dad had come down from the stands, tried to fight the ref, threatened to sue the ref, and security had carried my dad out of the gym. I didn't find that out till later. And so then eventually what happens is my coach comes back to me and says, you got to wrestle again. I said, not till tonight. And he said, no, you got to wrestle again now. I said, I thought that was the last round. He said, no, you got to wrestle the same guy. And I said, why? And he said, they gave him a 2-point near fall. And I said, when? He said, when he lifted your legs in the air. And I said, how? My shoulders weren't even at 90, much less 45. And he said, because of that blankety blank North Cobb coach. He bullied the other two. He said, you can whip him, just go out and whip him for 1 minute and let's get this thing over with. And so laying down did not do me good. By the time I got up, I don't remember being that dizzy. So I get out and I'm thinking, just get a hold of him, get a hold of him. So I went to get a hold of him, but when I took a step forward, my left foot caught on my right foot and I literally fell flat on my face. He didn't touch me. I just fell flat. He jumped on top of me, got a 2-point near fall. I escaped. Now I'm standing trying to get a shot on him, but he stood on the edge of the line. Every time I got a shot, went out of bounds, so I couldn't get a takedown. Time ran out and I lost. After that, I went to a place of mental imbalance. And I knew one thing. I knew that God had taken my state title. I did not know why, but for the next 5 months, I had a song by the Doobie Brothers called Black Water, oh Black Water, keep on rolling Mississippi Moon, won't you keep on shining on me. If you ever heard that song. It was very popular in 1975, played on the radio 10 times a day, and every time that song came on the radio, I would scream and hit whatever wall. Even if I was driving the car, I would start banging the steering wheel, and I would scream at the top of my lungs to God, why did you do this? Now, I knew nothing about God, and I'd been to church a couple times in my life, but I knew that God had taken my state title, and I was screaming, why do you hate me? Why do you hate me? Why don't you leave me alone? I worked harder. I was better. Why do you hate me? Why did you do this? And I would scream every day. Every time I heard that song, I would scream at God nonstop. I just would scream it, and then I would just shut down. I can shut down. I can still shut down I can go to a very deep place of shutting down. But that song would come on and I would just scream, then I would shut back down. The only other thing I remember is I wasn't suicidal, except I do remember I took this gymnastics class and I had a very strong neck because of wrestling, and I would do these back handsprings, which I couldn't do to save my life. And I would literally go up and land right on my head. And the gymnastics teacher said, you better quit doing it that way, you're gonna break your neck. And I remember thinking that would be so wonderful. Because if God's against me, I'm never gonna be anything. So I just kept screaming at God, and it would happen once or twice a day. And from February through July, and right after wrestling season was over, I had to earn money. My dad always required me to earn money. So I was working at Wendy's right down here by the Big Chicken, and that's what happened. So anyway, so it's now July. I've been working at Wendy's for about 5 months. And it was a Thursday afternoon, and I was a very hard worker, still am. My dad raised all of us 5 words, never let anyone outwork you. And so it was 4 o'clock in the afternoon, and very, very slow, hardly anyone in the store, but at 4:30 it would get busy again. So the manager said, Fitter, I don't want to let you go, but because I was the hardest worker, he could trust me to go outside. So he said, go out and clean the parking lot, and if you can't find anything else to do, sweep the sidewalk till it's polished. Sweep the sidewalk till it shines. And so I was like, okay, I cleared all the trash out of the parking lot, and I'm sweeping the sidewalk till it shines. I knew not to come in till like 4:30. And I come up to the sidewalk, and I look on the sidewalk, and coming about as far as that post from me, about 15, 20 feet, is this little man. And I mean, he was tiny. He was less than 5 feet tall, but he was real stooped over. And he was ancient. He probably literally weighed less than 100 pounds. And he looked, remember I'm 17 years old. He looked like 65, 70 years old. He looked ancient. And so I'm just thinking, stay out of the old guy's way, and I'm just sweeping. And I'm trying to time it so that when he comes, I can get out of the way. And no kidding, he probably took 10 minutes to walk 15 feet. And I remember thinking, I hope I never get that old and decrepit, he can't hardly move. And mostly I'm thinking, okay, he'll be here forever. I just sweep the sidewalk till it's polished. So finally he gets up close to me, and I just kind of step up into the grass. Yes, sir, let him by. I was a polite young man. Instead of walking by, as he's reaching by, he takes his right arm, reaches out, grabs my right arm. It was kind of surprising. Strength pulled me back in front of him. And I said, yes, sir. And he starts chattering in this thick accent that I can hardly understand him. So he has to say it a couple of times. And I realize he's asking me if I'm an athlete. Now, I had a short sleeve shirt on. My arms were like corded muscles. I mean, you could see from 15, I was like, hello, 2 + 2 = 4. But I was being nice on the outside. So yes, sir, I'm an athlete. And he says, well, I was an athlete and I was involved in sports a lot in the 1920s. And on the outside, I'm being nice. On the inside, I'm thinking, dude, it's 1975. 1920s was a million years ago. Get a life, And I'm thinking, my boss is going to see me standing still. And this old guy, old people, they talk forever. And dear God, I'm trapped here. And hope it's okay with the boss, and he's just talking, and so he's chattering about how he's an athlete, and he tells me he was a boxer, and well, that's nice, and I'm thinking, And then he says something that kind of got my attention. He said, in 1930, he fought for the bantamweight boxing championship of the world. And I went, oh, this guy's got some cred. He did something. I was kind of impressed. And he told me he fought 15 rounds, lost to the guy, fair fight. And then this little guy who couldn't hardly walk starts giving me boxing lessons on Roswell Road in the middle of the afternoon. And he starts getting a little bit spry. And he said, now when you box, I'll teach you how to box because you're an athlete. He said, I remember clear as it happened yesterday. He said, you punch once. He said, you punch once. He pops me in the stomach, a little tap, And he said, but you never box twice because it opens you up. You box. And he did like 3 times. He said, you punch once, back up. And you punch once, back up. I'm thinking, how do you move like that, little guy? You couldn't hardly move a minute ago. And he said, and I was, he's popped me in the stomach once, but he's backing up. He said, it's how you do it. Like, okay. And so, and then he says, and I said, dude, I was interested. I said, did you ever fight the guy again? He said, yeah, in 1932, we fought again, 15 rounds, he won. And while he's saying that, in the back of my mind, this thought began to form. I wonder if this guy is an answer to my question. I wonder if God, his life kind of ended in 1932. I wonder if God sent him for me to understand that wrestling was too important to me. And I promise you, the minute that thought coalesced in my brain, the instant it coalesced, he's sitting here dancing and telling me about boxing. The instant I finished it, he stopped as if he heard the thought in my brain and said, now I'm just a broke, useless old man. I was kind of like, well, and I pulled out my wallet. I had a 5 and a 20, and I handed him the 20. And then it gets terribly embarrassing at this point. He took the 20, and he started to fall to his knees and cry on Roswell Road. I don't cry. Never cried a day in my life. I'm not a crier. I'm a guy. And he falls to his knees to start crying and thanking me. Roswell Road and 41. But I'm quick. I'm a wrestler. I caught him on the armpits halfway down. And he's so light, I'm literally holding him in midair. And we did this weird little dance for 3 rounds. He's crying and saying, I'm sorry, I have to have that. I'll pay you back. And I found myself saying, you don't have to pay me back. Please stop crying. Please stand up. Please stop crying. I said, you've already paid me. And he said, oh, I'm so sorry. I'll pay you back. I said, please stop crying. Please stop crying. Please don't kneel. Please stand up. Please. I said, I promise you, you've paid me more than you'll ever know. He said, he's crying again. I'm so sorry. He said, I'll pay you back. I said, please stop crying. Please stand up. I promise you, you've paid me more than you can ever know. And he finally stopped crying. And he stood up. And I kind of, I got him settled and I picked up my actually I think I did this first. I don't hug guys, I don't touch guys, unless you're breaking their neck. But I just wanted to pat him. He's such a cute little guy. So I kind of pat him on the shoulder. I said, we're friends, right? He said, yes, we're friends. I said, we're good. You've paid me more than you can ever know. So I said, we're good. And he starts to walk on. I reached down and grabbed my broom. And I swept. And I thought, let me just make sure he's walking okay. And I went to touch his arm, make sure he's okay. And there was no one there. And I could see 100 feet in that direction and 300 feet in every other direction. Now, I need you to understand something here, because unless you're over 50, you can understand this. In your generation today, your mind has been so poisoned by media that you can understand a mind of a 17-year-old that at 17 years old, I had seen less movies than you've seen by 5 years old. And in 1975, the world was not obsessed with supernatural movies. You're being prepared for something by all the supernatural movies. So that happened to you today. You would have 1,000 movies to database something supernatural. I had none. We didn't have even cable TV. So I saw maybe one movie a week. So when this happened, I didn't have all this database to go crazy over. I knew that I had just talked to Jim, and I just held him in the air for 30 seconds and just had a 15-minute conversation with him. You asked me what I thought? I didn't think anything. I just froze. I had no doubt that I just had this interaction. In a stunned state, I picked up my broom, and I went to this quiet place. And by that night, I'd processed 4 things, and I was kind of shocked at what I processed. By the time I got off my shift, I realized 4 things. Number 1, I'm not angry anymore, which was really shocking. Number 2, a memory came flooding back within like 15 minutes. I was 17 years old, and I remembered a time when I was about 11 years old. I had not thought about this in 6 years. It was a time when my dad was in one of his rages, and I went out to hide outside. But the neighborhood, the gangs were roaming. It was very dangerous outside. So I found a field where I could hide, where the grass was kind of high, and I laid real still. So my dad couldn't find me, and the gangs couldn't find me. And the clouds were real beautiful that day, and I laid there for a couple hours, just real still, so no one would find me. And I'm looking at the clouds, and they were so beautiful. And after a couple hours, I started to feel safe. I never felt that before. And I remember looking at the clouds and saying, God, are you real? And wondering if that safe feeling, if there was a God. I hadn't thought about that in 6 years, but after the guy disappeared, I thought about that. The third thing I remember, which I had also not thought about in 2.5 years, was this memory popped into my head that I had not thought of, and that was, I remember 2.5 years earlier, all of a sudden, it's like I remember my dad walking into the house and saying to my mom, I got the strangest call from this guy in Atlanta that wants to hire me. And up to that moment, it never occurred to me that maybe God had intervened to get me out of that hellhole. And the fourth thing I knew was that there was a God in the universe, and wrestling was my God, and he will have no other gods before him. So the conclusion of teaching on angels is this, a couple simple points. Number 1, don't ever seek the attention of angels, because angels do not want attention, but demons do. And 1 Corinthians 11 says, 2 Corinthians 11 says, they can masquerade as angels. And in an end times obsessed world, be careful to desire to see angels, because biblically they do not want attention. All they want is focus on Jesus. And angel sightings are very rare and very, very life-changing situations. But the Bible does say, do not forget to show hospitality to strangers. And I didn't even think about this till this sermon. It never put together that I was very hospitable to this man. And maybe that's why the Lord allowed me to process it all the way through. And it does say that angels, every one of us, they're sent to serve us. And Matthew 18 indicates that every person has a specific angel that's assigned to you from the point of conception. And anecdotally, there's many stories of people who died and came back to life, that the instant they died, they met an angel who knew them every detail of their life from the time that they were conceived, that escorted them to the throne room of God. And I believe that's true. And I believe that once we're in heaven, we'll have the privilege of a friend who's walked with us through every moment of life, who may share with us 10,000 times that we are protected, that we never knew it. So the summation is really 3 simple points here. And that is, first of all, if you're here today and you are not living for Jesus, that's all those angels want, is for you to live for Jesus. And I would challenge you, if you're researching Jesus, get it done now. And we have 7 studies that any person in this church will walk you back and cover everything about Jesus, all that I researched, because I went on from there to tell you the rest of the story. In 2 years, I researched God, but I refused to become a Christian because my dad supposedly went to a Christian church. But in researching Islam and Buddhism and Hinduism, I eventually found the truths of Christianity through doing these studies. And in 15 hours, you can do more processing than I did in 2 years. So there's no reason to delay. Now, if you're someone who's not sure, I would challenge you this: find out. Find out quickly. Find out now. The Bible says these things are written that you may know that you have eternal life. Not I had an emotion or I had a prayer. Do you know what the word says? And I always tell people, start with any one of these. There's a CD up here called The Most Important Sermon You'll Ever Hear. And in that CD, I say there are 4 things in every book of the New Testament that every Christian is commanded to do. Very simple stuff, very basic stuff. Yet you live in an end times world where a lot of people say, oh, I'm a Christian, but I refuse to do all those things, even though they're commanded in the word. You're probably not a Christian. You're probably not going to heaven if you have renounced the word of God in those foundational things. So start with that CD, but if you have, and if you're all unsure, meet with any Liberty person and I will meet with you and I will give you Bible studies. I will never just say anything other than study the word. But find out. Don't play games with where you're going to spend eternity. And most of all, if you are sold out for Jesus, then what I would ask you to do is worship Jesus, because it's not angels we long to see. It's the King of Kings. Someone say amen. Close your eyes. Altar ministers, come to the front. And most of all, this is a sermon on Thanksgiving about thankfulness. So after I pray, I'm going to ask you to turn the person next to you, ask how you can serve and encourage them. If they have any prayer needs, if they want to research Jesus, or if they want a CD, just serve them. Or just ask them how their week is going and how you can pray for them. Father, we just open our hearts and say thank you. Thank you that there are thousands or millions of times that we've been protected. Thank you that you reach us when the world says we're unreachable. You have hope for us when the world says we're hopeless. And you have intricacies and plans that are far beyond our greatest imaginations. Let all the glory go to Jesus. In Jesus' name, all God's people said, amen. Will you just take